Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So, today's article, Falling in Lust, Sexiness, Feminism, and Pornography by Hans Maes, um, introduces a very important topic. We're going to talk about film again, but a rather controversial area of film, namely pornography. So, what's the upshot? Well, uh, Mays begins his analysis by talking about a 2017 paper by Sheila Lintott and Sherry Irvin, in which they argue we don't want to get rid of the concept of sexiness. They being Lintott and Irvin, believe that sexiness is an extremely important concept to a person's self-conception. But what they want to do, and this is what I did in my dissertation, you take a concept and you redefine it, right? And so Lintott and Irvin want to redefine sexiness in such a way that it goes from being a objective term that is to say an external term that's imposed on someone, but rather an internal term that one imposes on oneself. Um, as Mays describes it here, the Lintott and Irvin want to change it from again this external notion, right? Their definition is a person is appropriately called sexy if that person has a magnificent body infused with sexual subjectivity. Lintott and Irvin use the term magnificence to refer to the nowhere else but here-ness of a body that we can learn to admire. Now, admittedly, this remains rather vague, and it is vague, right? And sometimes vagueness is a little bit unavoidable. We want to try to eliminate it or minimize it if we can, right? But pressing on, the purpose of introducing the term is clear. They want us to resist imposing pre-existing standards on bodies, and instead to take bodies, particularly to take bodies on their own terms, thus making possible the aesthetic appreciation of the sexual particularity of a wide variety of bodily types. So Lintott and Irvin want elderly people and disabled people and people that generally aren't considered sexy to be able to think of themselves, to conceive of themselves as sexy, right? But Mays, no, this is only half the story. The second thing we should do is to ensure that our judgments of sexiness take into account not just bodies but embodied subjects. The proper target of such a judgment is always a body infused with an authentic sexual expression. That is, a sexual expression that really comes from the person herself rather than originating in or aiming at some external ideal. Evidence of such authenticity will be found in the person's confidence, comfort, and sense of improvisation, whereas discomfort, insecurity, and a strict adherence to norms as rules will indicate a lack of genuineness in sexual expression. So instead of thinking a woman is sexy, if a man finds her sexually attractive, if a man makes that vocalization, right, that proclamation, it should be the other way around. If a woman is sexy, right, then men should try to experience her as sexually attractive. That is nice in theory. How well it would work in practicality and in day-to-day life is another matter. So Mays, though, thinks that they're onto something here, and he asks, "Well, what's this culprit? I mean, what's the main factor behind our imposing notions of sexiness onto people, right? Rather than letting it come from within, rather than having someone say I'm sexy and have somebody else appreciate it." And on May's view, it's in our society, in American society, it's pornography. And pornography is a $10 billion a year industry minimum, right? Porn generates cultural conceptions of what is sexy. Okay. Well, granted that, what can we do? How do we go about changing this, right? And Mays, to his credit, right, he notes that I don't want to, I would want to emphasize that sexiness is not essential to a woman's value as a person, just as it's not essential to a man's value. Granted, it can be valuable and desirable to at least appear sexy to some people on some occasions, but this does not mean that sexiness as such should be seen as indispensable for one's self-esteem or the esteem of others. And that's very true, and that's extremely important to keep in mind. Let me give you an example of this really quickly. When Sonia Sotomayor was under consideration for a Supreme Court, she was nominated to the Supreme Court by then President Obama, right? Um, there were numerous comments on an internet thread, and I forget where this was. It might have been Reddit, about Sonia Sotomayor's appearance. Now, Sonia Sotomayor is a lady in her 60s, right? She wasn't running, she wasn't in a beauty pageant. She wasn't trying to be Miss Universe. She was under consideration to be a Supreme Court justice, right? So we tend to judge the worth of people quite a bit by their external appearance, and this is again consistent with our society that's obsessed with youth, right? Youth dictates everything, and this has been the case with the United States for quite some time, right? We market products to people based on how youthful it makes you seem, or how youthful it can make you feel, and that's just patently ridiculous, right? You got a very narrow window to be young, right? Um, that's not to say you have a narrow window to be fit. You can be fit your entire life, but young and flawless, if you will, that's something very fleeting, right? So anyway, what can we do? Well, what Maes wants to do, and what he thinks a lot of people are doing, and a lot of underground filmmakers are doing with pornography, is to elevate it to an art form, right? Um, what he calls radical egalitarian porn, right? So he sums this up down here at the bottom of page 478. The easy confluence of radical egalitarian and artistic ambitions is only to be encouraged. For one thing, achieving art status would grant pornography films prestige and a special sort of authority that would help us to undermine the influence and authority that any egalitarian, you might even call it corporate porn, right, still has in matters of sex. Moreover, it will help to pave the way for an open discussion of such works in the public domain and for a proper art critical analysis of this specific genre. This is another point that Mace wants to make. You have mainstream art criticism with respect to film, right? Films are criticized, mainstream films, that is to say, are criticized in the public domain. Pornography films are not criticized in the public domain. And he thinks we'd be better off doing that, because that would, again, force porn filmmakers to go away from the tired, male dominated, with the emphasis on male pleasure, and feminine pleasure, a very distant, consideration, if it's there at all, right? The fact that there is no public porn criticism in the way that there is film criticism or art criticism is no doubt one of the reasons why prejudice and misinformation can so easily spread and thrive there, right? Let's elevate pornography to art. Let's emphasize female pleasure. Let's emphasize those areas of sexual expression that have been marginalized or completely repressed by mainstream porn. Again, disabled people, the elderly, etc. Right? Women of color or people of color. Um, this would go a long way to, again, as he puts it, egalitarian, making porn egalitarian.